Hi there, I'm the Mox Miner, and today I'm going to show you how to replace the click buttons on a G700S. Recently, my G700S, the left mouse button would start double clicking. That's due to the button getting worn down and the mechanism suddenly not springing back. Therefore, it causes it to double click. So to do this, you're going to need a couple of tools. You're going to need obviously your G700, a screwdriver set, some alcohol wipes, some solder, the buttons themselves, a razor blade, either a desoldering iron or a desoldering gun, or some solder wick, a soldering iron appropriately for it, and some flux. All right, let's get started here. So the first thing that you're going to do is make sure your mouse is off. Then go ahead and remove the battery. Afterwards, you're going to want to take off the mouse pads. You can buy replacement ones, but if you do this carefully, you can salvage these without actually having to repurchase new ones. You just want to do it carefully and slowly and try to salvage it so that you have the sticky adhesive still left on it. Again, we're going to do that for this next side as well. Apologize, trying to do this with the camera in the way is a little bit difficult. There we go. Like I said, you just want to be careful with that. Try not to damage it. And then the final one. Right there. There we go. Okay. Once those are removed, then at that point, you're going to want to get your screwdriver. And you're just going to want to remove the screws that are holding the top on. They're all identical screws, so it doesn't matter where they go back into the mouse. There we go. All right. Now we just go ahead and remove the top cover. And it should come off just as easy as that. Remember that you have a little plug here, which you're going to have to disconnect. That disconnection for it, there's little clasps in there, which you can either try to poke through. Sometimes you can just wiggle it straight out. This one's going to give me some trouble, so I'm not going to be able to directly do that. just going to use a very small Phillips head. I'm just going to go right in here. And just poke the little item that's holding it in. There's another one over on the other side. And just like that, it should come out. Just go ahead and set the top assembly aside. You won't need that for the remainder of it. Okay, for the top section here, we basically have to remove this top piece. In order to do that, we first have to take off the scroll wheel, okay? When you take off the scroll wheel, you're going to need to be extra careful. I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. First things first, you simply detach the bar that's holding it in. Set that aside. Next, you simply pull up on the scroll wheel and take that off. Just set that aside. Now, once you've taken that off, you have two little screws or springs here. You want to be, pardon me, you want to be extra careful with these springs. If you lose them, they are a pain to find. I have done that myself. Just simply set that spring aside. And that spring aside, okay? After that, you're going to go back to your screwdriver. See if I can zoom in for you. And you're going to unscrew the screw right there on the left and the screw on the right. At that point, the top metal bar should come off. Now, you actually have to desolder these pins right here. You can do that with solder wick. If you do, I strongly suggest that you first add a little of your own solder to it, simply because it'll make it easier for it to be able to remove the solder. Industrial solder does not come off easily, and this just kind of helps it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just add in some of my own solder here. I'm not really caring about whether or not I mix up the joints or whatnot. I'm just trying to dilute the industrial solder. To make it easier to be able to remove it so that I don't burn out the board itself. At that point, I'm going to turn on my desoldering gun. If you don't have one of these, I cannot stress them enough as far as just how amazing they are. They just work fantastic. They're a little expensive, but if you do a lot of this, it pays for itself just immediately. So what we're going to do is we're going to desolder each one of these pins to completely remove everything. This is what it looks like at the moment. And here we go. So just going to put that right over the top here of the pin. and I just simply remove that directly off of it. So I'll do the next. And when I do that, I move it around just a teensy bit. And the reason that I move it around is I'm trying to make sure that I collect everything out of it. There we go. That should be pretty good. Let's see if I got it all. Oh, I forgot to remove the screws on the top of this mechanism here. Apologize for that. There we go. And at that point, this board should just come straight off, like so. Go ahead and set your mouse aside. All you're going to need is the center board. On the center board, again, you're going to need to remove both this clicker and that clicker as well. Again, this solder joints, they're going to be the industrial grade solder. Again, it makes it much easier to be able to remove it if you just go ahead and add in a little bit of your own directly to it. It basically just dilutes it down, and regular solder that doesn't come directly from the factory, I find just easier to remove. At least that's my impression. So after that, all I do is I simply come back with my soldering removal tool, and I'll try to see if I can get a decent shot here for you guys. And you just simply come straight over it. There you go. And that should just come straight out. Voila. Set that aside. Make sure you don't get the old ones confused with the new ones. Then again, same goes with the bottom one. There we go. And then just remove that straight off. Set that aside. Now, if you'll notice the orientation of this particular one, on the left mouse button, the button is facing down. On the right mouse button, the clicker is facing up. It's important to remember that when you put this back in. So, in order to do that, first one's first. We're going to want to put one over on this side and one over on this side. And I'm just doing a dry fit real quick to make sure that everything fits and it's good to go. Then what I do is I take each of them off and I grab my flux, and I'm just going to put some flux on each of the pieces. That way we can get a nice bond. There we go. there. And for this, you want it to be as close to the board as possible, so you need to make sure you elevate it just a teensy bit. So that way it's flush against the bottom of the board. Then at that point, you just simply come over here and put that on. And that should be basically flush across the bottom of that board there, okay? As close to it as possible, at least. So that one works good. Now, go on to the next one. And first things first, just add on a little layer of flux and a little layer of flux. At that point, that one's not resting as nicely. There we go. Okay. And just go ahead and solder that directly on. And voila. Nice and easy there. All right, so now we've gotten our buttons replaced onto the actual mouse. So we bring back over the bottom part, and we're just going to go ahead and line these up. Again, we're just making sure that this dry fits and it goes on nicely before we do anything. Sometimes you have to re-clean out or re-bend some of the pins, so again, doing a test before you get started, always a good thing. There we go, that looks fantastic. So we're gonna go ahead and take that off. And we're just gonna put a layer of flux on the top and just coat the pins real quick. Now, when I do solder these back together, you want to make sure that the pins are actually separated and they're not together. Okay. So, here we go. Apologize, this is a little tricky to do with the camera in the way here. little bit too much on there. Easy cleanup though. There we go. Just retouching up a couple of the other ones. All right, and that should be all those re-soldered back together. All separated. Nothing looks like it's over soldered. It's not a particularly good job, but doing it with the camera there is a little difficult. So at that point, we go ahead and we add back on our bridge. And those don't need to be super tight. They just need to be on there snug. Then we go ahead and we add back in our metal bracket. And I got a little piece of dust on there. Again, you don't need to crank these down. You just need to get them snug on there, and that's it. All right, now for the trickiest part, and that is these springs. You have to carefully place those back into the two little spring holes. Oh, see? I seem to have lost that one. There it is. Like I said, these are the hardest part. And this is much, much, much easier to do without the camera here in front of you. So that's one in there. And that's two. So that's what they look like when they go back in. Then at that point, take your mouse, and this now hooks over the springs but under the clip and just goes down into place into the center there with it. How you know whether or not it's working is if you tilt to the side, you should get some spring back when you do the side buttons for this. Then you go ahead and take your pin, you put that back into there, which now holds the mouse in place there, and you're good to go. Next step is to go ahead and put the top back on. Very easy. You just simply plug this directly back in. It should slide right in, no problems. Then at that point, you just simply put the whole mechanism back together, and it should snap back together fairly simple and easy without any pressure. It should have no lines or spacing or separation there. Then at that point, we go ahead and we put in the screws into the bottom. Again, you don't need to over tighten these. You just have to get them snug in there. I know a lot of people crank down on their screws and it just ends up stripping out the joints. There we go. we go. And the last screw. All right. Now, the second to last step, you're going to take your alcohol wipe and we're just going to clean off any leftover residue that's inside of these areas that the pads are going to go back onto. And the reason we want to do this is when we removed it, we may have introduced some dirt into the center there. So just simply clean that up real good. And then doesn't need to be perfect, but obviously the more you get off, depending on how much you've used the mouse and how dirty it's gotten, the better it'll be. There we go. All right. Okay, just wait for that to dry off just a little bit. There we go. It's alcohol, so it should dry off pretty quick. So next step, we just simply add the pads back onto it, and this can get a little bit tricky. The pads sometimes match up just perfectly and everything works great, and other times they don't quite go where you're hoping they would. So I find sometimes it's best to just simply match those up on one side and then carry it over to the other side, carefully pushing it into the hole where you want to actually go. And then just follow it around with your nail or some soft tool, plastic tool of some sort. And you just want to make sure that you squish the sides down into the crevice for it. You don't want to put too much pressure on it because you don't want to damage them. But at the same time, you want to make sure that they're below the ridge line for it. There we go. Two down. Now, if your pads have either lost their stickiness or if they got damaged when you were taking them off, you can easily buy a replacement pair online. They're available all over the place. Amazon has them. You just have to take a look for the replacement pad for your particular type of mouse. They're fairly cheap too. And usually you get 2 sets of them. There we go. Okay, so now I just simply push that down and I'm just making sure that's on there nicely. Glides nice, everything looks great. Simply go ahead and add back in our battery. Cover back on, power it on, and as you can see, power comes back on for it. And that's all there is to it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns on it, and I'll try to answer those as best as I can. Thank you very much.